Welcome to the latest episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. This is episode 246. What is the most important part of nutrition? Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Real World Nutrition. I'm Shelley Royale, registered dietitian nutritionist. And today I'm covering a question that a student asked me in class several years ago, which I'd never thought of before. And it seems pretty straightforward when it's asked, but it really isn't once you start thinking about it. And that question is, what is the most important part of nutrition? Now, when I thought about it, people do ask me questions like this all the time. Like, what is the most important nutrient? They assume I'm going to answer with a single important nutrient. Or what is the healthiest food? Because they're looking for that magic answer. What's the one thing I should focus on is another question that comes up. And I understand why. People want simple answers. People like shortcuts. They like knowing where to direct their attention. And unfortunately, the challenge here is that nutrition doesn't really work that way. Trying to identify a single most important part of nutrition is kind of like asking what's the most important part of driving. Is it the steering? Is it the brakes? Paying attention to traffic? Wearing a seatbelt? Knowing where you're going? When you think about that, of course, all of those things matter. And nutrition is very similar. Food is part of our lives from the very beginning of life. One of the first things that we do after birth is eat. Parents spend years worrying about whether their children are eating enough vegetables, getting enough protein, or enough of anything at all. Food shows up at birthday parties, holidays, weddings, family gatherings, business meetings, vacations, and celebrations. I once had a get-together one time and I didn't have food prepared. It was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And people were horrified. I'm thinking, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. What do I have to feed you? But food is culture. Food is tradition. Food is connection. Food is comfort. Food is nourishment. At least for most people, food are all these things. There are those outliers where food is not comfort, it is agony, it is distressing, and that's not what it should be. Because nutrition is not simply about nutrients on a label. Nutrition is not something that people need to think about only when they want to go on a diet. Nutrition is woven throughout our lives. And that's one reason I bristle when people want nutrition reduced to a single food, a single nutrient, or even a single rule. The reality is so much bigger than that. So if I had to answer the question, what is the most important part of nutrition? My answer would be this: patterns. Not one meal, not one day, not one food. Patterns over time. And I want to go over why this is the case. Because one of the biggest misconceptions I see is the idea that eating, or rather single eating decisions, determines our health. People say things like this all the time and they don't even realize it. Someone eats dessert and they feel guilty for doing so. Someone has fast food for lunch and decides they've ruined their day. Someone has a less balanced week and decides they've failed. But that's not how nutrition works. No matter what society or individuals might want to say about it, that's not how it works. One meal does not determine health. One meal does not cause heart disease. One salad doesn't create health. One day does not make or break anything. And if it did, vacations would be disastrous. Think about that for a moment. Most people have gone on vacation and eaten differently than usual. In my life, vacations are for the food experience, but I know not everybody lives that way. But when we're on vacation, maybe or highly likely, there are more restaurant meals. Maybe there's dessert more often. Maybe there were foods that don't normally show up in your weekly routine or ever, except for when you're on vacation. Yet, most people return home and life continues. The reason is simple. The body responds to patterns. So what we do most of the time matters far more than what we do occasionally. And I think that's actually good news because it allows for flexibility. It creates room for real life. It acknowledges that birthdays happen, holidays happen, travel happens, life happens, you have guests visiting from out of town, and you want to share all these experiences that you don't do normally. Nutrition should be able to exist within all of these situations without us having to feel like we're doing anything wrong. So, if patterns are important, so what would those patterns look like, or what should those patterns look like? Well, one concept that consistently comes up, and I bring it up often, is balance. Balance is one of those nutrition words that gets used frequently, but I want to expand on this more. I know I've covered it recently, but I want to talk about it more. So balance doesn't mean every meal needs to look exactly the same. Balance doesn't mean every plate needs to be mathematically calculated, measured, divided evenly. Balance means looking at the bigger picture. It means including a variety of foods. It means recognizing that foods aren't automatically good or bad. It means understanding that nutrition exists on a spectrum rather than in absolutes. Balance helps prevent extremes, because many diet trends do rely on extremes. Eliminate this, avoid that, never eat this food, only eat these foods. And these approaches work temporarily for some people or many people, but they're often difficult to sustain. So when I talk about sustainability, I'm talking about being able to do it long term. A balanced approach tends to be more realistic because it leaves room for flexibility. And flexibility matters as well. The more rigid an eating plan becomes, the harder it becomes to maintain. So we've got balance and we've got flexibility. And then there's another important piece of the puzzle that I want to make sure is clear, is plant foods. And when researchers examine dietary patterns associated with positive health outcomes, one theme appears repeatedly. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds. These are all plant foods that consistently show up. Now, I want to make this clear. This doesn't mean people need to become vegetarian. It doesn't mean everyone needs to be vegan. It does suggest that plant foods deserve a prominent place in most eating patterns. There's pretty much never a diet, long-term, healthy diet approach that says no fruits or vegetables, no beans or lentils. Because all of these foods that I mentioned, the plant foods, provide fiber, vitamins, minerals, and thousands of compounds that researchers continue to study. We call those phytochemicals. These are plant-based compounds, so phyto meaning plant, that are just in a variety of our plant foods that have health benefits. We don't need them to live, but it helps to live healthfully when we include plant foods. So some of these compounds, these phytochemicals, can help explain, or may help explain, I should say, why plant-rich eating patterns consistently perform well in nutrition research. So a practical approach from this perspective is simply asking yourself, how can I include more plant foods in my day? Not necessarily all plant foods, so that's saying animal foods can still fit. Not necessarily exclusively plant foods. Again, balance here. Just more plant foods. So sometimes And oftentimes, in my case, I really want to focus on what to add rather than restrict. So it's easier, it's more relieving. People like it better when I say, let's not focus on the restriction. Let's talk about what to add to your diet. And that's where I say add more plant foods. I'm not saying eliminate meat. Absolutely. I'm saying add more plant foods. Add. And one reason this topic of nutrition becomes confusing for a lot of people is that we want universal answers. And nutrition doesn't always provide them. I did a presentation just the other night. It was about hydration and electrolytes and these various things. And I could not give straight answers for a lot of things, not because I was being difficult. It was saying, yeah, in a lot of cases, straight water is best. Other cases, we want to add electrolytes. It's just going to vary depending on so many situations, the person, so many things. So nutrition needs vary in all aspects. A teenager has different needs than an older adult, and that may seem obvious, but people don't tend to think of it like that. An athlete has different needs than someone who is sedentary, and a lot of people don't always think of it like that. Someone managing diabetes is going to have different priorities than someone managing kidney disease. And then here's another thing that people don't think about. Culture influences food choices. What we do in our culture, your individual culture, that could be in another country or different parts of your own country. We have different cultural food preferences. Then there's personal preferences influence food choices. There's access influences food choices. Yeah, I can talk all kinds of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains and quinoa and all this, but if somebody doesn't have access to farmers markets or fresh fruits and vegetables, I'm totally on board with them having canned or frozen because we need to have access, and that influences food choices. Budget influences food choices. All of these factors matter. Sometimes people come at this from a point of privilege without even realizing they're coming from a point of privilege where they can choose wherever they want to go to get their food. They can turn their nose up at conventionally grown food and only go for organic, but not everybody has that choice. So I always say this is why two people can follow two different eating patterns and they can both be healthy. There isn't one dietary pattern that works for every person in every circumstance. It's also why nutrition advice on social media can be so problematic. Many influencers present personal experiences as universal truths, suggesting that because something worked for them, therefore everyone should do it, and then everyone watching thinks they should do it. But nutrition science doesn't work that way. Even if I told you exactly what I did today, a couple things there. I'm probably not going to do that exact same thing tomorrow or the next day. And why would you want to follow exactly what I do? You are not me. So the big picture here is evidence matters, but even more so context matters because individual differences matter. And something else I want to bring up is this tendency that nutrition is black and white. We view nutrition in black and white terms. People want foods sorted into categories, the good foods, the bad foods, the healthy foods, the unhealthy foods, the allowed foods, and the forbidden foods. And the reality is far more complicated. Because for most of us, those foods exist somewhere in the middle. I say this all the time. Nutrition is all sorts of gray areas. Because think of it this way. Is a cookie automatically harmful? No. It's how big is the cookie, what's in the cookie, how many of those cookies I'm eating, how often I'm eating them. Is a salad automatically healthy? Same thing. How big is the salad? How often am I having the salad? What is in the salad? Having a salad once is not going to be the road to health. having a cookie once or 3 times isn't going to be harmful. All of this means there's context in what is surrounding the food, how frequently we have it, how big is it or how small is it. So yeah, I had a colleague, a friend, not a colleague, it was a friend years back, she's long gone, but she was so proud. She told me, yesterday I had a pear. This is how infrequently she ate fruits and vegetables, so that she was so proud to announce that yesterday she had a single fruit. Hey, I'll take it. We've got to take this in mind. Frequency matters, so yes, I'll take that 1 pear yesterday, but let's work on more. But the overall pattern matters more. An overall pattern as well as other lifestyle factors matter more, because she also smoked, so there was way more going on there. But I want to just go back to this overall eating pattern matters. So this perspective of looking at patterns reduces that food-related stress by shifting the attention away from individual choices to more broader habits. And habits are where long-term health is built. Those habits, the ones that people always talk about, I've got bad habits. Let's talk about establishing those healthier habits. And that's where people have a hard time with the consistency. Consistency is not exciting. Consistency doesn't generate headlines. Consistency, rarely goes viral on social media. It's tough because we need to be consistent to see results. But if we don't see results after 4, 5, 6 days, people tend to be like, it's not working. But this is where the results happen long term with consistency. So eating vegetables once isn't difficult. Eating vegetables regularly matters. Taking a walk once isn't difficult. Being physically active consistently matters. Cooking a healthy meal once isn't difficult, or at least for most people it isn't. It can be a challenge for some. But building routines that support regular healthy meals matters. The things we do repeatedly have a much greater impact than those dramatic changes we make briefly. So that's one of the things I often help people with, is thinking about habits rather than the quick fixes. And yeah, it can be frustrating. Bad habits are easy to start. The healthy habits are harder to keep. So I just tell people, let's think about this. When you're trying to have habits, can you maintain it? I'm going to have a fruit with breakfast every day. Can you do that 5 days a week, 3 days a week, and then build up to 5 days a week? Can you continue doing that every day and doing it 6 months from now? Are you still doing it 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now? Right now, it may seem simple. Yeah, I can have a fruit every day for breakfast, but then after a while, people stop doing it. But if not, I just say, if that's that habit there, adding a fruit for breakfast, that's a simple one that I encourage people to try to start if they aren't doing that already. But sometimes there's habits that people are like, no, I won't. I don't see myself doing this all the time. I don't see myself doing it 6 months from now. I don't see myself doing it a year or 5 years from now. So if these habits that you're trying to do aren't something you can see yourself doing long term, it may not be the best solution. This is an example, is people say, I'm going to stop eating out. All right. I say it. Don't be ridiculous. Come on. Really? You're never going to eat out again? All right. I'm going to make meals 5 days a week. Again, let's be realistic. I don't always make meals 5 days a week. I don't really count. Some weeks I do multiple meals. Some days I find we're eating out a few times a week. It varies. So think about those habits. Is that something you can maintain by saying, I'm going to make meals 5 days a week? Is that realistic? Is that something you can sustain? You can just say, I want to make meals more often, but even more specifically, I'm going to do meals 3 times a week. Again, this is part of that whole, let's see what is sustainable. Is this something you can maintain? So this brings us back to the original question here, is what is the most important part of nutrition? And if I have to narrow it down, it's this: consistency with a balanced, realistic eating pattern over time. Not a specific superfood, not a supplement, not a magic nutrient, not a trendy diet, a pattern. One that includes a variety of foods, one that emphasizes plant foods, one that allows for flexibility, one that fits your life, one that can be maintained. Because ultimately, nutrition is not built meal by meal. It's built by choice, choice by choice, day after day, year after year. And when those choices add up over time, that's where the real impact occurs. So think about what choices you can make day to day, year after year. Choosing to have more plant foods and then being intentional with it. Just one example there. All right, with that, I hope you got an answer to what is the most important part of nutrition. That it's not all or nothing, it's not black and white, but those patterns over time and those choices you make over time. All right, with that, thank you for joining me on another episode of Real World Nutrition. If you enjoyed today's topic and you're not subscribed or following already, please do so. Leave a review, share this episode with anyone who might be wondering more about what truly matters most in nutrition. Maybe they're talking a lot about being good or bad, or those healthy foods and bad foods and good foods and all those things that have categories when there isn't always the category but the context. And that it's about building a pattern that works for you, that supports your health over the long term. All right, everyone, take care and bye for now.